Welcome everybody to our Continent 8 Ask the Expert series, where today we're in ICE Barcelona and we're going to be discussing insurance and how cybersecurity controls fit into that. And with me, I've got the lovely Liz Grimer, and let's go.
So I'm Elizabeth Grima. I'm Senior Executive Manager of New Dawn Risk. A little bit about myself. I've been in the insurance industry for 17 years. And I've always had a passion for the harder to place risks. Essentially, probably it's driven by the fact that I don't take no for an answer, and would continue to strive to get kind of the best result for my clients where possible, of course. I joined the team to place and to assist clients within the iGaming sector and other sectors, large and complex risks into Lloyd's of London and other international markets. So essentially what we do is we place harder to place risks, within that sector.
So let's kick off with cyber insurance 101. Insurance, we think about a financial reward for something that's gone wrong, but it's more than that. Could you tell us what cyber insurance is for iGaming and why it matters?
So cyber insurance 101, what is it? It's a shock absorber for cyber events. You've got cash, a team of experts, and a playbook that basically step in for, to support you in your worst case scenario. You basically take it as a resilience as a service, right? You've got a team of experts stepping in to help out and wrap things around as quickly as possible to get you back on your feet and contain the loss as much as possible.
Obviously, within cyber insurance, we hear people say, "Oh, it's okay, we've got insurance. We don't need to put cybersecurity controls in place," and vice versa. We have loads of cybersecurity controls. We don't need insurance. So how does that work? And is that reality? I mean, is that fair?
It's absolutely untrue. And basically, what you've got is cybersecurity is your guardrail, right? And then the insurance steps in as a financial safety net. And I mean, one goes with the other, of course. If you think of, from an insurance perspective, without cybersecurity, you've got lower limits being offered. You've got unfair maybe terms and conditions, and that will be obviously harder for you to take on. And you've got potentially no cover at all. Whereas on the other hand, with the right securities in place, you've got a better situation where you can negotiate better terms for yourself. You've got higher limits being provided by your insurance, and essentially cover. So definitely, it's not a case of not having the right controls and not having insurance in place. I mean, both come in together at the same time, really.
And another thing that I hear as well is, if insurance companies would always cover lost revenue. I mean, I know they cover particular events when they happen and certain conditions are met, but is revenue always covered? Lost revenue?
So loss of revenue is covered only when the right terms and conditions are met and the right triggers are fired. What listeners should really know is that triggers are not vibes. You're thinking security failure or system failure, and not just a slow day, for example. Another really important element is kind of the limits that you're purchasing. Are they adequate, for the business in question? For example, if you have a massive business that could suffer, millions in downtime just after a couple of weeks, is your limit appropriately kind of set to withstand that worst case scenario? Because that's unfortunately what people don't like to think of, is the worst case scenario. Another element is the time. There's a time deductible, also in line with, again, appetite and retaining risk. So for example, the first 8 to 24 hours aren't covered, and that is the kind of extent of the loss that you can withstand. Again, and generally, even speaking to customers, they always say, "Oh no, we're fine. Where our downtime is, not more than 8 hours. We can, get up and running." And I told them that's great, but what about your worst case scenario? And nobody wants to think about that, really. Another really important factor is the terms and conditions of the policy. Are you reading the fine print, and do you know what it is that you need to be following? For example, you need to notify the insurers within, I don't know, say 24 hours or even less immediately, for example. And are there other terms and conditions that kind of need to you need to follow in order for the loss to be covered. An example I can think of is with social engineering, where you've got impersonation and an attempt to defraud an individual by sending money to a third party at the wrong account. There's a condition in the policy that requires individuals to make a call back or to verify the details of the end user. And I mean, they often miss that. So they're in the chaos, they're in the unknown. They don't know that they should be verifying the details because they think it's legitimate. But then, they go down the path of making the claim and they realize that actually that was a condition and that
certain conditions weren't met.
Exactly. And it all boils down to controls, right? Yeah. So, when you're looking at the day-to-day business, are there controls in place that ensure that every individual making a payment is verifying the details, because that ties in with my insurance. Mm-hmm. So again, it all plays in, with having a solid kind of controls and insurance as a backup.
And I suppose that helps with best practices as a whole, right? Making sure that the operators are working in the sort of way that the insurance companies expect them to, but also ultimately that will help them as a business, succeed. And
absolutely. And again, I guess players like yourself who step in and kind of really provide that robustness to the businesses really does help set the bar for the insurers then.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate you unpacking some of the detail there that perhaps people don't understand or didn't realize when it comes to insurance. What we see is obviously attackers want to follow the money, right? Some people do this for fun, but in the iGaming industry, we have cash wallets that sit in players' accounts. It's like a bank account, really. So, you've got to protect it with the same kind of controls and the same mechanisms as you do any other bank, I suppose. So, at Continent, we're seeing various types of attacks that are taking place at the moment. DDoS attacks, more prevalent than ever. Trying to knock off and overwhelm a customer's connection or service. But we're also seeing social engineering 2.0 essentially, as you mentioned, with the use of AI and all this kind of stuff, you're really seeing the quality. You could spot emails that were phishing because had spelling mistakes and the logos were inverse and things like that. But nowadays, without AI tools, this is getting more and more sophisticated and they look real. It's getting harder to spot.
They're getting inside. I mean, they're doing the fraud from inside the systems,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So it becomes even harder to detect.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. And also the fact that these once you have hold within the company, it's easy to infiltrate them. And social engineering will always be 70% of attacks kind of come from people. Computers don't make mistakes. It's the humans that program them that make the mistakes, or the humans that answer them, right? So, and obviously, another thing we see is obviously ransomware 2.0. It's not just about encrypting the data; they're taking the data, using the data, and even checking through insurance policies and saying, "Oh no, we see here on your policies you've actually insured for £3 million or whatever it might be. So we'll have that much, please."
Exactly.
Or 25 million or whatever it might be.
For sure. And I mean, again, then from an insurance perspective, I guess how that kind of how those threats translate to an insurance claim. I mean, we have the whole spectrum of responses. From when you notice that something's gone wrong to settlement of. For example, the financial loss, as we're saying, the loss of revenue, which is the final bit, right? Covered. So you've got, once you've noticed something is wrong, you call up your incident response hotline, and you've got a team of forensics, of legal breach counsel, IT specialists, potentially even, kind of a ransom negotiator if this is obviously legal. Stepping on board to support. You've got PR, communications, everyone's involved. It's a team of experts that are stepping in to assist. So you've got the whole thing covered.
And that's really important, right? So insurance isn't just about giving you financial reward for something that's taken place and helping you get back on your feet. Essentially, it's more than that. There's teams that kind of sit around in crisis management, right, and really help your company get back on the feet with PR and everything, as you just said, and that's just some additional benefits that customers don't know.
I totally agree, and in fact, I guess it's the hardest message to convey, kind of in such a short, pitch, for example, and that's why this is great, the opportunity to convey the right message. People just stop and think of, kind of one financial loss, and kind of that's it. And obviously, people like to think that they've got everything under control, but in a time of chaos, right? To have all those people really on board and to step in and relieve you of that's priceless, really and truly. I mean, again, from threat to insurance point of view, when you think of, for example, a ransomware being infiltrated, you've got the whole spectrum of services, but then in addition, you've got, of course, as well, the ransom settlement, if that is legal. From a DDoS perspective, you've got, kind of, again, getting the systems back online, and then potentially as well the ransom payment. Social engineering, we said, the crime, the criminal activity could result then in a financial loss, and that's covered under computer crime or crime policy separately. So, every single loss will translate into a particular cover, and it's important, again, to deal with the right brokers and the right insurance advisors who can advise you accordingly, and ensuring that the coverage that you are getting is robust enough to cover all these, various scenarios.
And also, I suppose, thinking about supply chain as well. So, the gaming industry, as we know, is very interconnected. Businesses operate with each other through APIs and otherwise. Doing due diligence and ensuring that the partners that you're working with actually have insurance and have those robust controls in place as well is obviously really important.
It's actually it's interesting because obviously, from an insurance perspective, seeing various risks, you often get a one risk over on your table, and you're dealing with a client, and who their providers are, and the declarations that they're making could also be false, but you can't disclose that, of course, right? And it's interesting, right? As you said, to verify that the controls are actually in place. So it's not just dealing with an individual and you think everything's all good and dandy when you're having a great time and signing your agreements, but then when it comes to the actual deal, is it a solid deal, and have you patched all controls?
Very good. And obviously threats map to claim types and underwriting concerns.
Correct.
Can controls materially help? MFA, network segmentation, continuous monitoring, that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there's so much that can be done. Again, that as we mentioned earlier, helps the insurers get more comfort. So as you said, MFA everywhere, DDoS scrubbing constantly on. BCP, business continuity plans, and disaster recovery, tabletop exercises, ensuring that the business has included also payment flows in all of that.
So ensuring these are in place are kind of table stakes for most insurance policies.
Yes, it gives the comfort to the insurer to know that obviously the business that it's insuring has the controls that need to be in place, really, as a bare minimum, I'd say, these days, to at least withstand a storm, small storm. Then, despite the controls being in place, there's a hurricane, right? So there's something that's disastrous, and that is what the insurance is really there for. It's to
a backstop.
Exactly. For you've capped your appetite to, I don't know, set amount, and that's usually the excess and the waiting period, and then above that amount, this is where the insurance will step in. Okay. And talking about excesses, for example, excesses could be from 50,000 to 150,000. Before, when we first started writing iGaming risks, the appetite for the insurer was 150 was kind of the retention that the insured was to keep. Now they're getting more comfort and they are reducing that, to 50,000, for example. But it will depend again on the type of the risk,
Okay, that's interesting to know. From a technical standpoint, I mean, Content 8 put security controls in place that help prevent breaches from happening, right? That's our kind of area of expertise. When it comes to insurance, we mentioned is kind of a backstop after that event. But lots of people haven't necessarily been through this. So could you kind of talk us through what happens once we realise, the controls have failed, and you've stepped through into a breach or something like that, can you talk us through how that process works for containment and how you kind of like, what would you do with the policy?
So, I mean, obviously, the moment you realize that something's not right, even just a hunch, you call up your 24/7 incident response advisor. And what they do then is obviously, if it's nothing, they just kind of ask you to monitor certain things and, kind of just lay low, basically. If on the other hand, it's a fully fledged, kind of either data breach or whatever, they'll literally quickly step in to loop in the right individuals. So you've got, potentially forensic investigators, legal, breach counsel. You've got, your PR communications to communicate the message if there's been a data breach, who's been affected and so on and so forth. So literally a whole team of individuals, IT specialists and experts are looped in to assess the loss and also then to take on the next steps, what needs to be done. So what it looks like in practice, triage and contain. You've got to look at your systems, preserve the data, start your investigations, ensure that whatever has been damaged or affected is isolated. You've got legal and regulatory teams, breach counsels, investigating again who's been affected, who needs to be notified, when, and so on and so forth. You've got, again, your PR and communications teams ensuring that, the message is being conveyed as per the playbook, everyone's in role and in position to take on the next steps. And then obviously, again, from a loss of revenue point of view, you're assessing what the extent of the damage is.
Obviously, we, as I've mentioned before, we put the security controls in place. You ensure the risk that's kind of residual and left over. Could you tell us a bit how our partnership kind of came about, if you wouldn't mind?
Right. I mean, so essentially, if you remember a year ago, we met up at ICE, exactly, and we were just talking about our respective offering, right, and what you guys do and what we do. And I honestly thought at that point they were just so aligned, right? As in, your offering as a first line of defense and our offering as a second line of defense. They just literally one assisted the other, really. And so, instantly, I think we figured it out just there and then, and we started the process to kind of align our respective offerings. And what we've done is we've put together an offer for the iGaming sector specifically to Continent 8 clients, where all clients of Continent 8 can get up to a 25% discount depending on the level of
maturity,
exactly,
maturity, yeah,
of services that they get from yourselves. In addition to that, obviously, from our point of view, we're providing the top-notch coverage, and it's not just your off-the-shelf cyber insurance product which you can get from anywhere else, really and truly, but we're looking at your particular needs and we're ensuring that that's baked into your product. On top of that, you've got a playbook specifically built together for the iGaming sector. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. I'm really, really excited to launch this product, to launch this partnership, and it's very, very great to be here and to have this opportunity.
That's awesome. And Liz, it was great to have you here. So thank you for joining us. And, to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us as well. Look forward to hearing more and working through our partnership.
Exactly. I look forward to spreading the cyber and the cybersecurity love to the rest of the iGaming sector.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.